Hi, Elizabeth. How you doing?
And I just
Miranda is from Columbia River Mental Health Services. So it sounds like there's a lot of people from different places. Sandy's a career coach at JobLink program at Seattle Housing Program. Giovanna, case manager developer with the Y Social Impact Center, which is a part of the YMCA of Greater Seattle. Welcome. Lan, uh, providing vocational services to all ages, including youth. Great. Stephanie is from North Sound Regional Case Manager for Community Health Plan of Washington. Okay, wonderful. Well, welcome everybody. And Seattle Housing Authority, Job Link program. Some of our clients are former foster youth who have aged out of the system. So this is like exactly what we're talking about today, right? Rachel is from the Young Adult Housing Program from Olympia, and Julia is an employment specialist at Cascade Connections in Bellingham. Now, you guys might know that we're from Rutgers in New Jersey, so we have no idea where those places are and how far apart they are from one another in Washington. Jessica is a housing case manager. Dawn, can you go up 2 slides for me? I just want to show everyone how to do this. So as we're on the chat, you can see where it says all panelists. If you could change that to all panelists and attendees, that way everybody can see your responses or your questions, because otherwise it just goes to Dawn and me, and then everyone doesn't get to benefit from the great things you have to say. All right. So Dawn, if you wouldn't mind backing up a little bit. Just some housekeeping. Everybody's cameras are turned off, and you're muted. So if you want to ask a question, please feel free at any time to either type something in the chat box, say I have a question, you can raise your hand. Dawn's going to be doing the presentation. I'm going to be monitoring the chat. So if you have any questions, you could either type it in and then we can either open your microphone for you, or you can type the question in the box. And feel free as we go through to ask any questions as they arise. And then as I'm monitoring the questions that come in, I can stop and throw that question out there. So again, we have a pretty small group today. There's only 22 people on thus far. So we'll have plenty of time for questions and discussions, and we really encourage your participation and questions and comments. And Hindia just sent something in the chat uh, from Seattle Housing Authority. JobLink is career coach. All right, well, welcome everybody. So as I said earlier, oh, and just some housekeeping, another housekeeping tip, this session will be recorded and you will get, following this webinar, you will get the handouts of the PowerPoints as well as the link to this recording. So if you miss anything, you'll get the notes later on and you'll also get a whole recording of the entire session. So again, today's webinar is about transitioning youth from supportive housing into adult community mental health services. They have some unique characteristics that we're going to be talking about, and we'll talk about some strengths-based approaches to supporting a smooth transition to adult services for our service recipients. So just to introduce ourselves, Dawn, if you could go to our main presenter today is Dawn Reinhardt Wood. Dawn and I'm Jen Sperduto. I'm on the next page, but just so you guys know,
yes,
Dawn and
please
I,
don't read all of this, Jen.
oh no, I'm not. I was not. I was just going to combine the two and
Yeah,
say
sounds great.
Dawn and I are both from the Rutgers School of Health Professions, and we work in the Department of Psychiatric Rehabilitation. And our main role is to consult at the state psychiatric hospitals in New Jersey, so where we provide training, education, and consultation to the staff and the administration of the state hospitals. Dawn has extensive experience working in supportive housing in the community before she came to our program. So I'm thrilled that she is presenting this today. But again, I'm going to be the the support person. Dawn, if you just want to go to the next slide. That's me. I'm Jen. I'm the support person today, and I will be manning the chat and all the discussion stuff. So if you have a question, please feel free to shoot that over to me and make it on panelists and attendees. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dawn, and she's going to get us started.
Thank you, Jen. I appreciate it.
Sure.
So, I was just sitting here, and as you were saying, Dawn has extensive history or experience in supportive housing. And I'm thinking how challenging. Yes, I've had a lot of experience in supportive housing, and it looks like I'm not alone, because I was really impressed with everybody's experience and all the roles that they're playing in the community to serve people. As I was reading the chat, and I was thinking, even with all that experience, I struggled with serving youth who were transitioning out of foster care systems, out of, we'll just say, the kid system in general. And I really struggled as a case manager, because my career trajectory was, I was hired as a residential counselor in a 14-day residential program that was an alternative to hospitalization, to case manager, to supervisor of case managers, to director of supportive housing. And I still struggled with serving young people who were transitioning into the supportive housing programs, and even our homeless case management outreach program. We ran a program in our county. And I found that it was really challenging for me to work with the young adult population. And I did what, maybe, I'm going to assume none of you have ever done this, but I kind of put the blame on the client, right? They were so difficult. There were so many needs. And I just didn't quite know how to address their needs. So this actually has been, throughout my career, one of my challenges has been serving youth. And so it's also driven me to find out a little bit more about what makes them tick. Now I have a 12-year-old of my own, and he's entering this adolescent phase, right? Or starting to. So it's interesting to see it from both perspectives, right? From the service perspective and from parental perspective. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to start out with looking at some of the characteristics of what young folks who may be entering your program from either homelessness or from the foster care system, or just young folks who may have, they aged out of their home, or they're looking to leave their home of origin because now they are an adult, a young adult. The kind of characteristics that those folks are bringing with them. And of course, young adults don't all look the same. They don't bring the same set of strengths and needs. But we do know some pretty prevalent characteristics out there that we will talk about. We'll look at some of the basic needs that they may need you to urgently address as they're entering your program. And some of these could be really daunting. So we want to take a look at them now. Some of you who are a little bit more advanced in your careers, this may be like not a shock to you when we go over this. So if there's anything that you have seen, and again, this is national data that we looked at, but you may see some different characteristics or needs in your, small part of the country, just like we see in our little nook of the country. So if there's anything that you see that is different than what I'm presenting, please feel free to offer that, because your experience is just as rich and will add to this conversation. We will watch a very short video, under 5 minutes, about the adolescent brain. And I learned stuff from it. It's stuff that we know, as folks who have learned about psychology through whatever discipline, whether it be social work or psych rehab or psychology. We know some of the basics about the evolving brain, but sometimes we need to see how specifically it connects to adult living skills, and why we may be seeing some of the challenges that we see in our young adult population. We'll look at how we can help to normalize this transition experience, remembering that it is a transitional process to move from child to adolescent to adult. And that process isn't automatic and it isn't overnight. So how do we normalize that also in the face of an individual who has a mental illness, right? So not only addressing the needs that an individual has when they're transitioning from one life phase to another, but also those needs that they have to support and achieve recovery and maintain their wellness. We'll look at some support goals and values and how to continuously monitor the person's progress. So I mentioned that this group has a set of shared characteristics, transition age youth. And when we talk about transition age youth, you will see a variety of um, age figures out there or age ranges out there. So you'll see usually around 18. Now, adolescents can run through, we know that, and you'll see this in the video, the brain doesn't stop developing until around age 26. It probably explains a lot of our life choices when we're in our early 20s, right? I had a very boring early 20s. But, we make some knuckleheaded mistakes, but, that kind of puts it into some context that like it takes our brain up to about age 26 to finish most of its higher level development. So, but most of the people that we see who may be entering our or your supportive housing programs, your housing, your community mental health programs, are probably within the age range of 18 to 22. And this may vary based on where, your geographic setting, because you may have programs that serve kids who are aging out of the foster care system or youth systems of care that may take them up until slightly later years, like if they're enrolled in college or something like that. So, but typically this is the age range that you're going to see young adults entering into your traditionally populated adult programs. About 23,000 young adults leave the foster care system every year. Now, that's one of the largest referral sources to adult community mental health programs and to adult supportive housing programs is the foster care system. But what we also know is that about 25% of just those individuals will become homeless within 1 to 2 years. Um, and it's for a variety of reasons. Does anybody want to guess as to why some of that may be? You could plop it into the chat. But there's a variety of reasons why people may become homeless. And, some of the evidence suggests that one of the ways that people are most likely to become homeless is because, the system fails to support them through a transition, right? So you've had housing for 12 years or 18 years or however long it is that you've been in the foster care system. And if you don't achieve permanence, you have to go at some point, right? And so if we don't have an effective support system in place as the person's making that transition, whether it be to supportive housing or to independent housing, or to some other arrangement, the chance is the likelihood is much higher that a person will become homeless or incarcerated, hospitalized, or something else. And then others are coming to us, from homelessness. They may be coming to us from homelessness. They may be getting referred from youth case management programs. So individuals may be deciding that it's not a tenable situation to stay in their home of origin forever and ever and ever, right? As most people seem to choose as they begin to age. And so it might be naturally supporting in them transitioning into the adult level of care, maybe not even out of a foster care system, but looking for that next step that will support them in their adult phase of life, even if they have that supportive family unit around them.
Dawn, I
And
just want to interject real
yeah,
quick. Jennifer just posted that no credit, having no rental history, minimum wage employment
yes,
options, and
my
those are
goodness,
really, um, really important factors that, and she says she sees that every day, with the youth that she
absolutely.
works with. And those are things that are, how do you overcome those, just those three things: no credit, no rental history, and minimum wage employment? It's like this catch 22
Right.
situation that people get into.
And that gets at this idea of human capital and social capital, right? So if anyone's ever heard of human capital theory, it's this idea that as we go along in our life, we build capital, or we build this, like, we invest in ourselves, right? Through little, I don't say little, but different life experiences that we take for granted as people who maybe have not spent our lives in the foster care system, or just remember what it was like when you were 18. Did you have a rental history? Did you have a credit history? Probably not, right? So, and now
No.
we're expecting folks to transition at this age where there's an awful lot of folks in our world today. And I know, just speaking for myself, and I graduated undergraduate education over 20 years ago. Um, I didn't have those things that I needed to be out on my own. And I continued to live at home for a while, right? So we can't take those things for granted. So excellent addition. Um, intersectionality, right? So people are coming, and this isn't alone, this isn't just the youth that we're serving, but we have to remember that folks that we're serving um, have a lot of characteristics that they may be stigmatized for in our society, um, in their personal lives, and at at in the greater society. These things can be race, sexual orientation, or gender, their abilities, right? So differences in abilities, whether they have an identified psychiatric or physical disabilities. And we know that, different disabilities carry with them stigma as well. Definitely, I'm sure there's probably at least one person who's in attendance today who has seen the stigma that goes along with, maybe a person admitting to, and see even how I say it, admitting to having a psychiatric illness or disorder, and the way that they are received by the community, right? We know that people are judged for these types of conditions. And
And
so,
I'll just jump in for a
yeah,
second, Dawn, and say, like, these are the things that, for some things, when people choose to disclose, right? But then there's other things like race, gender, perhaps, or sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, that there's not necessarily a disclosure that goes with those things. They are just there and they're evident and people can see it. So it's not about choosing to
right.
disclose, right? So that stigma is there whether they choose to say something about it or not.
Right, absolutely. So it's like really important that we're considering that the folks that we're serving are bringing a lot of, for lack of a better word, baggage stuff that is, holding them back. And so we have to consider from their perspective, the different levels of barriers and stigma that they have faced throughout their life, and how we're going to be able to effectively partner with them to work towards their recovery goals in a way that's affirming, feels accepting, and regardless of our experience. And then also that the individuals that we're serving, again, this is not restricted to only youth, are have probably experienced multiple traumas. It's pretty safe to say that if you are homeless, if you have been in the foster care system, and it could be a wonderful foster placement, right? But that something has happened, that you have found yourself in the foster care system, or something has happened that you have found yourself in the homeless system of care, right? So, kind of moving our perspective from what is wrong with you to what has happened to you, and trying to be inquisitive and asking those questions, like, what are the things that you've experienced? What are the things that we want to try to put in place in your environment that is going to help you feel safe and well and able to recover? Because one of the things that we want to also avoid is not seeing somebody re-triggered, re-traumatized, right? So some of the things that we have to also keep in mind are things like epigenetics. And I'm not a geneticist, so I'm not going to get into, nor am I a evolutionary psychologist, so I'm not going to get into a big lesson about epigenetics, but there is scientific proof that the trauma that our grandparents faced and experienced, whether it be lack of food, so food instability or war, sexual assault, these types of traumas, especially when severe, imprint on our DNA and can carry forward. Not only on the scientific side, but also, right, think about what happens in the family unit when there are traumas. So remembering that the person is not just a product of their current environment, but their historical environment as well. Caregiver abuse or neglect could have happened, right? So we may be struggling with forming a rapport with people. I'm sorry, I should probably close my email so I'm not getting numerous alerts. Human trafficking. So, this does occur with youth, especially entering your system of care. This is probably a specific question you need to ask. I mean, I think our screenings are getting better and better. But even still today, like we're still having the conversation here in New Jersey, like how do we screen for trauma in our state hospital systems, right? And it's amazing that we're still trying to figure that out. But, asking people specifically, what is the bad stuff that has happened to you? And it might not be appropriate to ask, what traumas have you experienced? Because for some folks, the traumas are so numerous and have become almost so normalized in their experience that they may have integrated them into their experience and they may not stand out as traumas so much. So using something like the Adverse Childhood Experiences checklist is a good tool to use with people to kind of find out where they're coming from in terms of a trauma history. And pervasive crises, right? So we're all experiencing probably a couple pervasive crises right now. This year alone, we've probably experienced at least two, the pandemic and some of the a lot of the social, I don't want to know if I want to say social instability, but demands for social justice and protest. And I don't know if I want to say that's a crisis per se, because I think that people demanding justice is a good thing, right? But there is a stressor, and also recognizing that people from other populations who may be subject to receiving more stigma, more prejudice, more discrimination, may have been going through these pervasive crises for a very long time. And we need to honor that, respect that, and pay attention to where people are. Jen, did you want to say something?
I'm sorry. Yeah. So I was waiting for, then I didn't realize my microphone was open. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
There was just a quick question from Miranda. The 23,000 people who leave the foster system each year, is that just from aging out, or is that a combination of, um,
Yeah. So that is due to aging out.
thank you.
That was specifically due to aging out. Yeah, that was from Covenant House. So there's two resources. I'm not sure if I know I listed Covenant House in the references, but Covenant House and the Annie E. Casey Foundation are excellent resources for a lot of these statistics, and they have a lot of great videos. So I think Miranda raised her hand. Let me see. Maybe.
Yeah, I think that might have been the,
Oh,
no, she
okay.
said it was an accident.
Okay. Oopsie, I'm sorry. All right. I'm trying to get my chat off my screen. There we go. All right. So hopefully that slide didn't scare you. Hopefully it was an acknowledgement of what a lot of you may be seeing as people are entering your programs, or at least giving you kind of the reason of why people may be coming in with so many needs that you may feel daunted to be able to address them. I know that's how I felt. But one of the things that as case managers, and I saw we have a ton of case managers in the room, and I was about to type, we have my people in the room, because I love case managers and I love all that you do. And I saw we actually have a nurse case manager in the room, and that was always a coveted, I always looked for RNs in my program, and it was always so difficult to find RNs who were willing to work in our programs. But that as case managers, people come to you and it's like, blah, here's all my needs, right? Here are all my problems. And you, as a case manager, you feel like now it's my job to fix a lifetime of just awfulness for some people, right? Some people have had really, really awful lives. And we feel bad and we want to help them. But what we need to do is we need to address the urgent needs first. There are bigger goals. We want to see people, achieve their rehabilitation goals, whether they be to go to college or to just to get a full-time job or to be in a relationship, to have a family. But we need to address the urgent needs first. So the 5 things that we know that youth exiting the foster care system who have not achieved permanence. So that means, and the reason why I'm concentrating on youth exiting foster care, because it is probably our largest referral source for adult systems of care, is that, when folks don't achieve permanence, when they don't achieve adoption, when they don't find their forever family, they are at risk for homelessness. Does it, not really tricky to figure out why. They don't have that family of origin. They don't have that, or they don't have that adoptive family to offer them that safe place to stay, to grow, to flourish. They are more likely, so in turn, they're more likely to engage in high risk behaviors. So it could be sexual risk taking, entering into a situation that may place them at risk for human trafficking, drug use, unemployment, early parenthood as a result of the engagement in high risk behaviors, and also perhaps sexual trauma and substance use disorders, right? And so a lot of those we see in our adult population, right? We tend to serve folks who may have had kids at a younger age. And when we start to dig a little bit more, we find out that those folks didn't have the best childhood, right? They may not have had the support systems that others have had, that maybe some of us have had. So it's understandable to see how the youth who are entering in, when we get them from that early age, when they enter in at 21 rather than 42, when sometimes we see them, why they may be bringing with them all of these urgent, high risk situational needs. So I want to go ahead and play this video now. I'm going to test this out. It worked okay for Jen and I earlier. Sometimes there's an audio issue, but this is from the Annie Casey Foundation. They have several other videos, so I want to give them the credit for that. They do have several other videos, but I thought that this one was short and it really explained like where youth entering into our supportive housing programs are neurologically, developmentally, in their brain development. And so you see here, the actual age of the adolescent brain for development is preteen. So like where my kid is at 12 to 26 years of age. That's a long time. And it feels very long. I'm looking at it as a parent now and I'm like, ow, will I survive that? But that's a very long time. So keep that in mind when you're thinking of the person you may be working with who you're like, why aren't they getting this, right? Whatever skill it is you may be trying to teach, or a pitfall that they seem to be falling into over and over. Take this to heart and think about it, and then we'll talk a little bit about it afterwards. So if folks can give me an okay in the chat after I hit play to let me know you're hearing this or that you can't hear it, let me know.
When kids become teenagers, they enter a phase of rapid development. It's easy to see how they grow physically, but some of their most important growth is invisible, happening inside the brain. The adolescent brain makes giant strides from the preteen years all the way up into the age of 26. During this time, the brain is hard at work, absorbing information and experiences. The adolescent brain is strengthening neural pathways, wiring connections, and pruning away what isn't being used. Beginning in adolescence, young people gradually start to gain their independence from family. It is especially important during this period of development that adolescents learn how to regulate their emotions and gain more control over their impulses, plan ahead and think critically, and engage in introspection. These are all key building blocks to cementing a solid foundation for healthy adult life. This healthy adolescent brain development cannot happen without having opportunities to create and maintain healthy and consistent relationships, try new things and engage in healthy risk taking, exercise autonomy, learn new habits, and heal from past trauma. But for young people who have been separated from those they know and love by the foster care system through no fault of their own, this stage of development looks very different. Just being in the child welfare system can inhibit the healthy opportunities all young people need and can put its own brain strains on young people. These include attachment disruptions, destabilization, moving multiple times, harsh restrictions and punishment, having their normal adolescent behavior viewed as a mental health problem, community, family, and school changes that disrupt their learning, poor access to vital mental health care and support, discrimination based on their race or sexual orientation, and the reality of exiting foster care without a permanent family or connections. Fortunately, neuroscience is teaching us that there are ways to turn these brain strains into brain gains for youth who have been in foster care. Brain gains include having opportunities for healthy risk-taking, getting a job and managing money, building skills for independence while maintaining interdependent relationships with caring and consistent people in their lives, learning to drive, participating in the planning and decision-making for their lives, engaging in and promoting learning that offers incentives and rewards, taking on leadership roles, creating activities that help the brain to grow and heal, such as meditation, sports, exercise, and self-guided activities, and having the freedom to safely explore religion, sexuality, and gender identity. Young brains thrive on rewards. When young people have positive experiences like these and succeed, the adolescent brain's active reward center kicks in to reinforce those experiences by wiring more connections and giving a young person courage and confidence to achieve even more. Young people are extra sensitive and highly attuned to their environment and the people in it. Every moment counts. Every interaction matters. So, what are you wiring for? There's so much more adults can do for young people emerging from foster care. Learn more about adolescent brain development and strategies for young people in transition by downloading our paper, The Road to Adulthood, at www.aecf.org.
Okay. So I don't know why, I just really like that video. It made things more concrete for me. So what do you all think? Have you seen I think one of the things that I like that they talk about are the role that adults can play in helping to transition youth, um, and maybe also helping to engage them in those opportunities that they did not have as a youth in the foster care system. Jen and I were talking before we opened up the room today about um, those missed opportunities. And Jen, I don't know if you want to say anything about that or anybody else.
Yeah. So what we were talking about was if you compare, some of the experiences that people at this age have to, similarly to people who have other mental health conditions where they might have had their, onset of depression or anxiety and schizophrenia or bipolar disorder around this time. The onset of schizophrenia usually happens around, late teens, early 20s. So all of the things that we expect people to know and do around this age of, 18, 19, what are we doing at 18, 19? We're going to college, baby. We're, leaving our parents' homes. We're learning more independent living skills. So people who have certain mental health conditions may have had that process interrupted. Kids in the foster system may have never learned it. People with mental health conditions also may have never learned it because they hadn't gotten that far yet. So there's just a lot of things to consider when we think about what's the norm of like development for that age group, and what's happening in a young person's life at that time that's not allowing them or affording them the opportunities to learn certain skills, to be independent, and to have the supports that they need to transition into adulthood successfully. So I think that's just something to always kind of keep in mind. We just kind of assume that people know these things. And like Dawn was saying earlier, after college, yeah, I didn't have a rental history. I didn't have a credit history. It was like I couldn't just, click my fingers and, be a functioning member of society at that moment. Like you need to build those things. So I think that's where we find a lot of our youth who are coming out of the foster system. They haven't had the opportunity to build those blocks and learn those skills yet. So
Yeah.
how can we help them?
Thank you, Jen. Yeah, absolutely. So I I think that probably I don't know if there's anybody else who wants to share any some of their experiences. And we're going to move on. I'm going to cover some more stuff, but I just remember one of my probably one of the traps that I fell into. And I probably still do this. Actually, I find myself doing this with my kids sometimes, and that is like attributing a behavior that is normal for an individual's age to being something that is abnormal or indicative of like a behavioral problem, right? A mental illness. And I
Yes.
think and I think that with transition age individuals, we'll just say, transition age individuals, it's real easy to fall into that trap because I remember having an individual I was working with who was 19. Man, he had a ton of goals. I liked working with him because he had a lot of youthful energy. He had a lot of goals. And he did silly, stupid kid stuff, right? That he would get in trouble for. And it was very hard for me to take off my hat of mental health clinician and say, this behavior could look like mania in another person, but is it, right? Is it just impulsive actions that a young adult is engaging in? And so, like, teasing out that kind of stuff is difficult, but that's why it's important to educate ourselves as much as possible. And that's not to say it's not mania, right? But just considering that there is so much that could be going on, that could be happening with young folks that we're serving, that it could very well be just a part of the normal aging, developmental process. Does anybody else want to say anything about the video or anything?
While you guys are thinking about
Yeah.
that, Julie mentioned that budgeting is one of those skills that's such
Yes.
a huge barrier to success for many young people. And I said adults too,
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah. Like,
But imagine how difficult that skill is if you've never learned it or if you've never been taught and you got to kind of figure that out yourself. And yeah, especially with the foster kids who may not have had that experience. And
right.
Sandy just said if trauma is not resolved, that behavior and reaction pattern stays with you forever, no matter how
Absolutely.
old someone gets. Yes.
No matter how old and where the person, I'm a big fan of um the mind, the mind. Well, I think that we all get it, the mind body connection, but especially like where that person holds their trauma um um in their body, right? It- Trauma stays with you a very long time because if you think about a scary experience that you've had at any point in your life, right? Maybe it was maybe it was as a kid, maybe you were or maybe you were in a horrible accident and you remember what it felt like. For me, I feel my trauma in my chest and my stomach. And no matter how old I get, when I get scared, when there's a trigger that is close to that trauma, that's where I feel it immediately, right? So also finding out from that person, you know, and if they're not ready to talk about the trauma, that is okay. Finding out what the triggers are is very important, I think. And also, treating everybody as if they have trauma, right? So, not meaning treating as in providing treatment, but using something that we've been calling trauma universal precautions. Just like we say, in these days of a pandemic, we want to keep our distance, we want to wear a mask, and we want to wash our hands, right? Those are our universal precautions against disease transmission. We want to use universal precautions against trauma when we're interacting with folks because we also don't want to re-traumatize, right? As a system of care, that can be traumatizing. So we also want to make sure that we're supporting and nurturing the person and not re-traumatizing them. So that is why it is also important to ask about those traumas.
Before you move on, Dawn, Rachel just brought something up that I think is just so important. She said one of the biggest struggles when you leave the foster care system is that they really haven't had a lot of freedom or community skill building. They've had a hard time doing things on their own. And then now all of a sudden they get all this freedom.
Yeah.
And sometimes, end up with like the the slide a couple back, like those high risk behaviors,
Yeah.
um, you know, doing risky things or unsafe health issues, landlords, the law, like all of those things. It's kind of like, do you ever get the you ever go to school with somebody who had a really sheltered
Yeah, and then they get to
existence?
freshman year and they go wild.
Right.
That was my
It's
roommate, Jennifer. Jen, did you know my roommate
I
freshman
did
year?
not, but
Why
I
I
knew
came home
plenty of
every
them.
weekend?
I knew plenty of them, but that's what that reminds me of. It's
Yes,
like
it
you
is.
don't have that the freedom in a safe way to learn and explore and develop. So when when you are presented with that freedom, it's like woohoo, let's go. And then that leads to all kinds of
Problems.
unsafe issues and
Right.
problems with the law, with the program, with just
Yeah. Yeah, and
so great
it
point, Rachel. That was really good.
excellent point, Rachel. Thank you. And yeah, and so and you know what? The landlord doesn't care if this is normal developmental behavior or if this is like just violation of a lease. All he or she knows is their lease agreement has been violated. They are a business person and they need to be able to run a business, right? And we get that. And so we're not going to be able to prevent every exit out of your program. And I know I wasn't able to do that as well. Hopefully it will give you more information for working with folks in the future. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Like that and that also is risky to your program, right? Because every relationship, every bad experience with a landlord makes it more difficult for you to find a housing placement for your next client. It just really does. And so you're absolutely right. That fantastic point to bring up. Thank you. Okay, so let's move on.
Quick question
Yeah,
before you, I'm sorry, Dawn.
no, it's okay.
Aaliyah just said the universal precautions reference. Do we have
Oh,
a reference to that? Do we have
you know,
specific ideas of what that could look like?
yeah,
She
so
said she's new, but she wants
yeah.
to really learn how to
So
do that.
Jen, I'm wondering if we should if you can just
Post
like
the video.
make a note and maybe we can put yeah, post a link to our
I'm
video.
going to do that right now.
So you guys, I'm screeching because I played a really horrible, nasty um staff member. Okay, so you'll all see me in my role as a bad parent. That's what I said. I said I will channel my inner bad parent. And we made a video for our state hospital system of care to introduce this idea of trauma-informed universal precautions. So Jen's going to share that video. I just ask you don't watch it right now. I'm very self-conscious now. Thank you, Jen. So she will share that, and also you're free to access our website that our state hospital psychiatric rehabilitation website. You're free to peruse that for other training videos. But yeah, we'll get you some resources on trauma-informed universal precautions. And maybe that will be a presentation in the future.
And Dawn, one more question from Sarah. You discussed systems of care can be re-traumatizing. Can you talk about some
Yeah.
of the primary ways this happens and ways to help mitigate this at a systems level?
Sure, sure. So, when I was talking about the ways that the system of care can be re-traumatizing, so I'm going to give like an example. This is one that stands out a lot to me, and I think all of you. I don't know exactly how psychiatric screening happens, what that looks like in the state of Washington. So I will tell you from my perspective in New Jersey, and Jen's perspective from working in case management and also working in psychiatric screening in psychiatric outreach. Um, the way that people get care, emergency psychiatric care, can in and of itself, this is just one example, can in and of itself be traumatizing, right? So think about somebody experiencing significant symptoms, perhaps having suicidal ideations, perhaps having command hallucinations, things that make it in New Jersey, we have the right as screeners to instruct law enforcement to take people out of their homes or wherever they are if they are presenting as a danger to themselves or others, right? An imminent danger. But that involves law enforcement. What other physical condition does law enforcement take you out of your home, take you out of your place of work, take you out of the community by force? And I'm not beating up on law enforcement at all. This is the system we set up, at least in New Jersey. It's for the protection of the outreach worker. So for me, who's going out, is for protection of the client who's receiving services and the community. But think about that, right? Law enforcement may accompany an emergency squad or a paramedic unit when they're responding to a heart attack for general safety purposes, right? They want to make sure the scene is safe so that the paramedic can do their job and save that life, right? But in our system of care in New Jersey, we can extract somebody by force, which may mean cuffs, which may mean restraint in some way for medical care, right? And so that in and of itself can be a traumatizing situation. And we are doing it, we think, in the best interest of the individual that we're serving, right? So that's like one of the, that's an example that I wanted to give of how parts of the system of care can re-traumatize an individual. Now imagine if that individual had been restrained in the past, had maybe a negative interaction with law enforcement. And you can easily see how a situation could explode when we now send a screener out and law enforcement out when they're in this state of, psychiatric crisis, right? Or in other systems of care, in hospitals, people may be secluded or restrained for what we see as dangerousness or acting out types of behavior, self-harm. Imagine if that person was a victim of sexual assault and now we're not me, but the royal we're now tying them up and restraining them and restricting their movement, and we're now replicating an earlier trauma, right? So those are the kind of the examples that I was referring to. Does that make sense? So it's, how do we address people with a trauma-informed approach? And so that's what we talk about with the trauma-informed universal precautions, is assuming that everyone is carrying some level of trauma with them. We're all definitely carrying some bad experiences with us. Now, bad experiences doesn't necessarily equate to somebody developing a trauma response, right? You and I could have experienced the same thing, and I go on to develop PTSD or some other trauma response, and you don't, because maybe you're more resilient. You were able to be more resilient. That's what I was referring to as like some of the systemic trauma that can happen. Any other questions before I move on? And no, thank you. I don't think that we as a system of care set out to hurt people. So please don't take that away from it. But I think that anything we do, we could probably do it with a little bit more, from a little bit more trauma-informed perspective, myself, all of us included. So some of the things that are associated that we will see consequences of folks who are entering our system that may have some of these cognitive and executive deficits. So when I say cognitive and executive deficits, I probably should have had a slide before this one, but we mean those kids like you saw in the video that did not make those gains, those brain gains, right? Because they weren't able to take risks. They weren't able to experience consequences from those risks in a supportive environment. They weren't given the opportunity to maybe engage in budgeting or to spend time away or to take those risks that many of us have taken as young adults. And so therefore they haven't had those brain gains. So they may be, so what science has found is that having cognitive and executive level, those higher level brain functioning abilities, deficits in those areas are associated with people experiencing disruptions in their academic, trajectory. So folks may take time off from school. I mean, folks do that all the time, but This may not be a willful choice. Cognitively, executively, they may not be able to juggle. They may not have the study skills that they need, right? All of these things that we acquire as a young adult. Their academic achievements are probably going to be above average, consequential to having academic instability. And they will likely have high rates of untreated psychiatric conditions, primarily around those that we see that are consequential to trauma and to developmental disruptions. So anxiety disorders, substance use disorders, and mood disorders, which are all also highly comorbid and associate with each other to a great degree. So it's not uncommon if you're seeing young adults entering your program with some of these psychiatric conditions. That's not to say that they might not be entering with schizophrenia or something else. So in Saperstein's study that he did, where he saw these brain associations or these associations of these consequences to the cognitive and executive deficits, he saw that 50% of them had cognitive deficits who had a psychiatric condition. I'm sorry. So 73 individuals who had a psychiatric condition also had cognitive deficits. So of the folks that you were working with who are young and who have a diagnosed psychiatric condition, I say that because I don't know if each of your programs require that a psychiatric condition is like a prerequisite for entering a program. In the programs that I worked with, we were funded by New Jersey's behavioral health, or the Department of Health, and specifically for behavioral health conditions. So we only serve folks with a psychiatric condition. So that would mean that 50% of the folks that we served had cognitive deficits. So, and this is when you compare them to the general public at the same age. So performance also on working and verbal memory was less than 70% performance than that of ages, the same age in the general population. So the folks that we are serving really are at a deficit when it comes to, at least 50% are at a deficit when it comes to some of their cognitive functioning. So we need to be reminded of that. And as much as possible, we want to support any kind of cognitive remediation interventions, which are usually offered by psychologists and occupational therapists, cognitive remediation, and any kind of educational supports, because that level of cognitive impairment is also associated with people not earning a living wage. And we know that in the United States, and it's different in different parts of the country, but I know here in New Jersey and probably in Washington, definitely, I know it's expensive to live around your big cities like it is here. What a living wage is, I didn't make a living wage when I entered the mental health field. So let me just say that. Jen, you could probably say the same thing. When I entered,
I can definitely say the same
yeah,
thing.
and I had a bachelor's degree and I made $7.47 an hour. So, this is something that we have to be mindful of. So, and we are going to talk about a couple of programs that can really help not only as a safety net, but also help teach people skills who may be at risk for falling behind academically and falling behind in their development of human capital career-wise. That are great interventions for this group of young people, young adults. All right. So we did mention briefly about intersectionality, and I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide. But again, remembering that even so, I keep saying kids, and I'm sorry if there's any young people who are in that demographic, that age range that are in this room, but you know what, be complimented. I'm calling you a kid right now if you are here, because people are starting to call me ma'am right now, and I don't like it so much. So, so in addition to all those cognitive deficits and just the normal developmental experience that the kids that are coming into our programs are facing, they're also facing this mess of stigma from intersectionality, right? So all the things that make us who we are can also be stigmatized, right? So society kind of decides what characteristics are desirable for the in-group and what are seen as undesirable, right? And unfortunately, many people have been on the receiving end of this. And so it is very, very important, why I put it in here again, is that on top of all this, we have this other layer of yuck that people experience, that we have to at some point find out about with people, and that we need to like affirm a more positive experience. And one of the things that they said in the video that I think is so important is that, you know, we have the opportunity to be that reliable, dependent, or dependable, reliable, and supportive adult in a person's life. And just one anecdote I want to share with you from my career was that I worked with an individual who I'm going to be honest, I never looked at his date of birth for the first 6 months that I worked with him. And I was a new-ish case manager. I had been in the field for a couple years, and he just was the way he presented was very childlike, right? Just what we're talking about here. Didn't know how to budget, didn't know how to apply for an apartment, didn't know how to apply for a job. I was doing all that stuff with him. When it came the time for me to do my first service plan or treatment plan or recovery plan, whatever you may call it, when it was time for me to do my first one with him, I realized we were only 6 months apart in age. He's exactly 6 months younger, not younger than me to the day. And
Wow.
I'm still in contact with him to this day, actually. He eventually became employed at the organization where he received services and is doing really well and has a family, but that is how far the gap was, right? He now is a 44-year-old and me now as a 44-year-old, almost 45, just the sheer amount of experience that he didn't have with trying new things, with taking risks. I really thought he was at least, you know, I don't know how much younger than me that I thought he was, because I was only 22 at the time. So, or 23 at the time. So, but it's just amazing how far people can fall behind when they don't have those opportunities. So the other thing that I want to mention is that disproportionately minorities, and here we have figures on Black Americans. We didn't exclude any other population or only focus on African Americans specifically for any reason other than the data is the best, with looking at or comparing the experience of Black children to white children. And what we see is the rates are about 1 in 5 in Black children who will experience maltreatment, and that's a range of behaviors. And it's 1 in 10 for Caucasian children, and about 9%, and I'm sorry, this picture cut off the word history a little bit, but about 9% of African-American adults will have a history of PTSD as compared to 7% of whites. So the one thing that one of the reasons why I show this slide is because you see, right? Look at how drastically different the experience of maltreatment is in these two populations. So you would think that African Americans would have a much higher rate in adulthood of PTSD than Caucasians, right? Don't see as big of a difference as you might suspect, right? And so we don't necessarily know why. We don't know if one population is more resilient than another. There may be cultural differences, but this is why I wanted to highlight, I wanted to use this to kind of highlight that not every single experience that we have that is bad or that we view as bad will develop into a trauma response. But the rates are still high enough that we see almost 10% of Black adults that we may be serving and about 7% of whites adults will be experiencing PTSD. And that's in the general population. So that is not individuals who have a mental illness. So I would suspect that probably when we look at that more restricted population, the rates are probably much higher. And a lot of some of the ranges that I've seen out there are between 25 to like 60%. They're all over the place. We just don't have really good data yet in the population of folks with psychiatric conditions. So some of the support that we need to throw to people right now is helping them to develop higher level skills. So things like insight and self-awareness, like knowing who I am, knowing what my values are, knowing what my goals are. And maybe they don't know all of that at this point in time. They're only 20, right? Or they're only 19. Sometimes I still wonder, what are my values? What are my goals, right? So, but we're going to be helping them towards that process. And we can do that through goal setting and simple conversational exploration of what are their interests, right? What are they interested in? Professionalism. So as people start to enter, whether it is the workplace or an academic setting or a volunteer setting, or, I worked with folks who exited my program very quickly because they ended up going into the military. And that is what they wanted to do. But you still, right, there's something, you can't walk into the recruitment center and act, silly and foolish, right? So we would have to do some role playing with how do you work through that. So a lot of role playing with people and an awful lot of modeling, right? So demonstrating to your client what it is that you would like them to demonstrate to others. Providing them with workplace and career knowledge. So what it takes to be a good coworker, what it takes not to be that annoying person in the office or on the team. And just generally, career insight and information. And we will talk about some supports for that. And then finally, helping individuals figure out how to emotionally and behaviorally regulate themselves without a parent, without a case manager, without somebody telling them, you need to calm down now. This is a time you should be upset. Why are you so nonchalant about this, right? You should be stressed out. Having that individual learn to develop those self-regulation skills, which again, we all may still struggle with from time to time, but those skills that they need as an adult to manage those emotions. Okay. So you may not see this necessarily as much with young adults who are transitioning into your programs because they are most likely have been in a system of care or, we are seeing less stigma in the young adult population around mental health conditions, which is a good thing. But there is still stigma and there is still internalized stigma. I think some of our messaging that we have all been doing that, there's been a lot of positive messaging in the media about stigma related to mental health conditions and really providing more education, but there's still a lot of work to be done. And we know that most people, even those who are educated, will delay seeking treatment for 8 to 10 years because of stigma. And it's usually the internalized stigma that they feel there's something wrong with them, there's something undesirable. People will push me away if I seek treatment for mental health conditions. So I put that in here just to note that you may also get people who enter your programs at a later time who may be delayed, right? Because not only because of these developmental delays, but also because of delaying treatment for mental illness, which we know causes the trajectory or the prognosis of that mental illness to be much more negative. Okay. So what can we do about it? What can we do as case managers, as providers to support the individuals that we're working with? So because I saw quite a few of you are case managers, I know that you're doing a mix of things, right? You are you're providing education about mental health. You are providing education about medications, whether you are licensed to do so or not. You are providing information on education and employment and how to register to vote. And you're almost everything to everyone, right? Or you may feel that way sometimes. But I know that also an awful lot of what you're doing is you're making linkages and referrals to other community programs. So as service providers, obviously, about permanent supportive housing. We're going to focus mostly on supported education and supported employment here. To those deficits that the people are bringing with them to your program can effectively be addressed using supported education, supported employment, and providing that safe space, that safe and affordable and decent housing, and the supports that are needed there to keep them there during this transitional process. And these are 3 evidence-based psychiatric rehabilitative interventions that currently have the scientific base behind them to say that they are effective in what they set out to do. And that is what you see here. So supported employment really does focus on that life
Education
domain.
first.
Oops, sorry.
Okay.
Did somebody say something? Oh, no.
I said education was first.
Oh, yeah.
Just so you,
Yeah. So they focus on this life domain of education, right? So for the individual, that may mean, very sorry, fall allergies.
God bless you.
Thank you very much. So for the individual that we're working with, this may look different for different people. So not sure what it looks like in Washington. In New Jersey, we have something called the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation. You may have something similar. And people can be referred to that for funding or to see what they're eligible for funding for educational programs or for specific practical supports, maybe study skills, maybe a specific training program, right? So it may be financial and it may be practical support and instruction in an academic institution, some community programs have supported education. Staff, excuse me, struggling with my allergies here, but wherever they occur, the individual is assessed and they are provided with individualized supports and instruction that helps them with achieving their educational goals. So whether that may be a college program, whether it may be a technical program, it might be getting the GED or getting a high school diploma, finishing high school. That was one of the things that we worked on with one of the youth that I worked with, was getting his GED. He actually ended up getting a high school diploma through a night program, but those kinds of supports. So this may reach outside the scope of your program, right? I don't expect, hey, look, I might be an educator, but I don't know what it takes to support someone who may have these cognitive deficits and to really do some targeted educational supports. I don't necessarily have that skill set. So it would probably mean referring them out, linking them to another program while you're simultaneously serving them. And many colleges, universities, technical schools will have offices of disability services, which can also support individuals who do have a diagnosed either learning disorder or behavioral health disorder or other physical disability. So the offices of disability services are key to connect with if you have any young people who are interested in applying to colleges or to technical schools. Should really encourage them to link up with those offices of disability services, because they could really help connect people to supports. It could even be in-class note takers. I've had students who have had in-class note takers in college. So there really is a range of supports that are available for people. Supported employment is another evidence-based practice that is effective at serving transition age youth. All of these are also available on the SAMHSA website if you're interested in looking at them. So United States Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services. Okay, thank you, Jen.
Sure.
So there are technical assistance bulletins on those websites, and they will also have descriptions of the interventions. So there may be things there that you are able to integrate into your professional life that you use when you're working with folks. Maybe they don't necessarily have to be sent out to another program, but these programs are available. Supported employment focuses on the life domain, or that domain of work and career And one of the things that I think several people were talking about was folks not having work histories and not having credit histories and not having rental histories, right? So this area really focuses on that kind of that second arm of human capital theory. So like the first arm, the education, and the second arm, the employment skills or career skills. So really focusing on finding out what the person is interested in. So there are lots of um, online resources that you could utilize with people. I think there's one called ONET. I don't know, Jen, if you could look that up while I'm talking, but that is a very interesting website that's free, and that I've done it because I actually took a career counseling course, and I went through as a client would, working through what my likes and dislikes are with work. And at the end, it tells you, if any of you have ever taken the ASFAB or any of those other kind of like career oriented tests, you go through and it will kind of tell you at the end what careers are good matches for you. Now you may look at it and say, nope, have no desire to be a politician. But, there may be other jobs that have certain tasks that fall within that job that you might be interested in. So it will also tell you related jobs and what the requirements are for those jobs. So it's a really cool starting point for people who are starting to explore career options. And supported employment programs will do that with people, but this is something that you could be doing with your clients, whether they are transition age or whether they're, middle-aged. You could be doing this with folks. So not only do they do this assessment process, but they also offer people flexible, ongoing supports. So this may mean that a person might have a job coach, right? So they may get that job and then they have someone who checks in with them. People may check in on site in the workplace. They may be providing the support off site in an office, like your traditional outpatient program. They may be doing it on the phone. So these are flexible, ongoing supports. And they do help work with people on what it is to be a good coworker. How can you set boundaries with your coworkers? How can you say no to a boss's demand that you work overtime? Like all of these skills that folks may not have learned through trial and error and just through sheer risk during the developmental process. Okay, and also then we have obviously permanent supportive housing. So permanent supportive housing, what you are all doing in your various roles in supportive housing is teaching those skills that a lot of us learned through observation and trial and error in our households, right? If our developmental process was not interrupted, we probably observed people in our house taking care of the house. I'm sure if your parents are like mine, you did a whole heck of a lot of the household cleaning and maintenance. And thankfully, because I knew how to do my own laundry and I knew how to wash the dishes and kind of sort of budget when I was of the age to be expected to do so. Social and coping skills. So knowing that a lot of the folks that you're working with have experienced potentially traumatizing events in their life. You may be teaching them coping skills that they have never been taught before, or folks may be bringing with them some maladaptive coping skills like smoking or overeating or drinking. You may be working with them to help find more appropriate positive coping skills, right? So,
And just let me
yeah,
pop in for a second.
yeah.
Unlearning,
Oh, yeah.
unlearning the unhealthy, maladaptive coping skills is harder than learning good coping skills that
Sure.
you just never had. It's the going backwards and taking the bad stuff away to learn the good skills.
Yeah.
That's actually harder than learning them right out.
It really is. And one of the things, and we talk about substance use I was say apartments, but it could be any supportive housing unit or any unit where we are renting from a landlord. That is really risky, right? And one of the things that we know is if a person is entering and they're using substances, the likelihood that they're just going to stop when they move into that apartment is really, really low. So one of the other things that we're working on is, we want to be able to start to add those positive coping skills before the person is expected to stop utilizing the bad coping, or I won't say bad, but the things that have gotten them through in the past that aren't so good, like, using or smoking or whatever they may be. So that is going to be a struggle with the folks that we serve. But like we can't being completely clean from substance use and then developing the coping skills is not going to work, right? We have to introduce them a little earlier. Conflict management skills. So as a case manager, I am sure you have been put in the position so many times by either your clients or your landlords, or you're just all of a sudden you're getting a new and I hate to refer to people as cases, but you inherited somebody from someone else who left, and you're working into, you know, this disaster of a situation, and you're going immediately into conflict resolution mode. But we want to be able to eventually teach people to manage conflicts on their own. And we do have another training about that. It should be in our video series called 3 Steps to Safety. And also we do have some videos on communication, but teaching those good communication skills from the outset when you start working with someone. And then
Also for people who, you know, have been in the foster care system, you know, that to me right out says maybe they didn't have the best home life before
yes,
they went into the foster care system. So the skills that we just naturally observe, like, you know, social skills and coping skills, conflict management skills is one of those. And if you know, if the person you're working with came from, you know, a family that didn't necessarily have those conflict management skills, or, you know, a positive role model to see how conflicts are managed, and they came from a family who fought, or if there was you know, verbal physical abuse, like that's how they learned to manage conflict. And so now we have to again unlearn those maladaptive conflict management skills and learn how to do it in a more productive, successful way.
yeah, and that's very challenging. I mean, I'm going to speak for myself, but when I said I revert to bad parenting in that video that some of you may end up watching, which I'm so nervous about, but anyway, um, you know, it is that reversion to, you know, it's the bad, you know, we all learn good and bad stuff from our parents, right? And we're not all the best communicators all the time. And so it's like, you know, knowing that people do revert back to bad skills sometimes, when, especially when they're under stress. And so being able to get ahead of stressors and figure out, like, what is that person's coping plan for when things get bad? Do they just need to walk away? Do they need to find a quiet place? Do they need to blare really loud music? You know, what it is, whatever it is, to manage themselves so that they can then manage the conflict. Thank you, Jen.
Sure.
Oh, we are here. Wow, we only have 10 minutes left.
I know that went fast.
Sorry. So,
So I want to open it up for discussion after
yeah.
you do the summary and see what people have to say.
Yeah, so we went over a lot of stuff today. I felt like the time flew and we could use probably another half hour, but just to hear from you guys. But so we talked about the characteristics that transition age youth bring with them to your programs, right? So, and discuss this impact of intersectionality. So always being mindful that on top of I don't like to say just, but having a mental health condition and being homeless, obviously needing supportive housing, um, there are these other layers of stigma that an individual has been facing that has made their development more difficult. That these youth who are aging out are at much higher risk for homelessness, joblessness, early parenthood, and substance use. And positive supports can continue to nurture the brain development that we've seen interruptions in. So it's not that they can never, ever get that back. Brain gains can still be made, right? So we even know that as adults, you know, my age, I'm in my 40s, if I engage in activities that support brain elasticity and plasticity, I can regain some of the neuron losses that I've experienced for whatever reason, right? And so you can also do that in your programs with the young adults that you're working with. They can still make brain gains. And supports such as exploring goals and the use of EBPs that we talked about, specifically supported employment, supported education, and permanent supportive housing can all be helpful interventions. So why don't we go ahead now and turn it over to discussion.
So what questions do you guys have, or thoughts on, you know, anything new that might have been uh, presented today. Jessica, yes. Jessica just asked if we're going to get the PowerPoints. You will get a copy of the PowerPoints in addition to the link to the actual presentation. So we've recorded the whole webinar. You'll get the link and the PowerPoints. You're welcome. Any thoughts on how using some of these interventions with the folks that you work with, or something that, stood out for you today?
Or any
Uh,
experiences that you have had, any different resources that
yeah.
have been particularly successful that we may not have talked about. Maybe you had a occasion to work with a client around something and you found helpful that others may also find useful.
Dawn, can you say something more about referring clients to other systems? Sometimes that is more trauma.
Oh, so do you mean, yeah, so like completely handing off the individual, like almost like a cold handoff? So, or working with individuals, like staying involved. So there's a couple ways that could happen, right? So we may, I'm sorry, I don't know why I went to this screen, but maybe it's okay that we're on it. This is our
Sure.
website. I'll leave
Yeah.
that up for a while, free advertising. So yeah, navigating systems is extremely difficult. It could be extremely overwhelming sometimes for us as case managers, right? Especially if you've been out of the field for a while. I myself have been out for 6 years now, or out of case management, and I don't know if everything's still the same. But yeah, so I think that probably the best advice is to be with the person, whether that means physically with the person, and I don't know about that right now because of the pandemic, but providing that ongoing support, whether you are completely handing the person off to another system of care, and that means you won't be involved anymore, or you are referring them, meaning they're going to get services from supported employment and you're going to stay involved. I think that the most important thing is to be that constant in the person's life. And whether that means, hey, I'm going to check on you. Like, I would say, don't leave it up to the person to check in. I would say, I would like to check in with you in a couple days to find out how that phone call went with the Board of Social Services, with that supported employment program. That is, if they don't want you present there while they're calling or whatever it may be. And because I want to find out how it went for you, right? Some of the young people that we're working with haven't had a person who has said that to them, or the only person that has done that has been that foster parent or that youth case manager that was working with them. So we do want to be that consistent person or that consistent presence. If it's a team, some programs are more of a team approach. But I think that in my experience, that has been one of the things that clients that I've worked with have told me is, anecdotally, I knew I could call you. I knew you would be there, right? So, and I didn't do anything fantastic. It was just that whatever the question is, it's not too silly. But sometimes I think that people have to be reached out to, because it's easier for us to say, it must be me if I can't figure this out, right? So working with folks.
Yeah, and while we're Anne also asked you, we use motivational interviewing skills as part of how you work with these young adults. Absolutely. I think motivational interviewing techniques and those skills are something that we should really be using across the board, because it's looking at how a wonderful technique. Yep. So it's looking at how we get people to think about the changes that they need to make, and how we, offer reflections and let that process develop from the person, from the service recipient, rather than us imposing our thoughts, beliefs, and ideas onto them. So it's about getting the people that we're working with to make those light bulbs go off, right? To have those ideas about change themselves, and eliciting that change talk and ideas of how their life could be better if they made those changes. So motivational interviewing is something that's really, really important. And so just this is a beautiful segue into the slide that's up now.
It really is.
It is, because we have a motivational interviewing training on this website. So please write down the link to this website. It's the link that I posted earlier on the trauma informed universal precautions video actually links to this website. But this is a website, as you can see, it
I'll
says
type
the
it in,
State Hospital Psychiatric Rehabilitation Initiative. I posted it earlier, Dawn, but just so
Okay.
you know, um, this is a website that we developed when the lockdown and quarantine first happened back in March for us. And so by the end of April, we developed this website um, for the staff, primarily for the staff who work in the state hospital system. But there's a ton of resources that are helpful for anyone who works in this field. Thank you for posting that,
no
Dawn.
problem.
There's a list of online trainings that you can just click on. You can take the training. It's free. It's open to everybody. So there's trainings on grief and loss. There's training on motivational interviewing. There's training on crisis intervention. There's training on group facilitation skills. There's a whole slew of trainings that you can take. And when you complete the training, you can do a quick post test and evaluation, and then you get automatically emailed a certificate of completion. It's not a CEU, but if you need to show supervisor, like, hey, look what I did, or just add that to your dossier for, promotion or uh, staff development kinds of things, those are there. There's also a ton of resources on self-care and wellness and self-care webinars. There's also a list of over 200 mindfulness practices that you could do. So we developed this initially to provide support and self-care resources and working at home resources for staff who were now working at home. But it actually aged quite nicely since many of us are still working at home. But there's a ton of resources and online supports that are available. So please, please, please check that out. It's free. Again, it's open to everybody. And there's a lot of really good stuff on there. So it's 1:59. I want to be respectful of your time, but if you have any questions, we could certainly stick around for a few more minutes. Dawn just showed the references and the resources that that are used in this training. And again, you will get the PowerPoint and a link to this recording. So you'll have all of that information available to you. Oh, there we are. Look at us.
And there we are. Hi.
Hi,
There we
everybody.
are. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And I hope you have, it's rainy out here. Probably looks like more like Washington out here. I'm looking out my window now. It's cool and rainy. Hoping you're having a wonderful day on the West Coast, or wonderful start to your day. And hope you have a fabulous rest of your week. Thanks for being with us.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.